Yeah.
And that's sometimes on the fly.
Yeah. We flipped that, right?
We actually had a big search and
Some good gadgets.
a couple
Yeah.
of V3s from
So,
couple of
well,
V3s
we're starting a little bit late, but I thought it was
Going
worth relating for a couple of the stragglers because of the weather out there.
searching for gadgets.
Thank you for coming. The objective for tonight is obviously to give some information to you about the new field of neuroscience and how it relates to leadership. But it's also an opportunity for me to talk about my company and my company's services because the more I can get the word out there, the more people I can help. And what I'd like to start off with is just give a little bit of my background. There's a couple people here who know me pretty well, but I've been studying leadership and ethics for not leadership and ethics, leadership for about 33 years. Ever since I started my first day of NJROTC in high school in Alaska. So I was born in Paris, France, raised in Eagle River, Alaska. Has nothing to do with the neuroscience, but kind of gives you some insights that I might be a little bit different. But so I started there, and so I've been in the conversation of leadership ever since then. I went to the Naval Academy, spent 11 years as a naval officer, and one of my tours while I was in the Navy was to come back to the Naval Academy and teach leadership and ethics. And while I was there, we were revamping the curriculum because when I was a midshipman, the only thing I remember is Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the different types of power. But none of what I got out of there did I feel like I used in a conscious manner in the fleet. So I was really excited. We started teaching Myers-Briggs type indicators. We started teaching about Covey 7 habits, things that are like more useful and more applicable to our everyday jobs. And I really enjoyed shifting the paradigms of the students in the class from thinking that either you have leadership or you don't, to thinking, you know what, there's stuff that we can learn and I can change my perspective on it. And so that's where I decided that this is what I wanted to do. And after I got out, I've done some leadership development for some startup companies with PBS for a little bit, and then started my own business with my wife called Bravo Zulu Consulting. And some of you might have heard the conversation earlier. I'm the Zulu part, Zachary, which is the Zulu, and then my wife is the Bravo. And Bravo Zulu in the military means well done. So my objective when I work with companies is to have it so that when we're done working with them, they look back at what they've accomplished and they can say to themselves, well done. So that's kind of the premise of our business. So tonight, we're going to talk about some of the research on neuroscience and how our brains work, and then how that can apply to not only leadership. I say leadership, but it really is on how effective we are in our lives, whether it's at work or whether it's in our personal lives with our relationships. So we're going to have 3 talking points, just leadership in general, important topic from the perspective of organizations and business and getting things done. And then we're going to talk about how the neuroscience plays in. And then the last thing we'll talk about is how to take advantage of that. So before we get started though, we're going to do a little exercise. So what I'd like everybody to do is cross your arms. Tom, you're already ahead of me. So it's just a simple act. So now put your arms down and then cross them again real quick. Okay? So this is an activity that we don't really have to think about. So now we're going to do it one more time. But this time I'm going to show you a slide and there's going to be a question on it. So go ahead and put your hands down on your laps. So when the slide comes up, you're going to simultaneously cross your arms and answer the question. And this is the interactive, out loud, just shout it out loud, the answer to the question. So everybody ready?
Right.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
20.
Okay. So I heard 9, I heard 20. Is it times? Okay. So did anybody feel a little bit of a stutter when they crossed their arms? Some people didn't necessarily see the plus, or they saw a plus instead of a multiplication. Okay, so put your arms down. So we're going to do, actually this time we're going to do it differently. So cross your arms. Now I want you, I'm sorry, I'm going to move this before it falls off and distracts me. All right, so now I want you to look down and say out loud which wrist is on top.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so some of you, right, who's right? Whose wrist is on right? Okay. and then the other, your left one's on top. Okay, now, do it the other way. So that your opposite wrist is on top. And don't cheat, don't do the Egyptian, you know, just really put your hands, okay. So now, we're gonna go through the exercise again, but this is the way you're gonna cross your arms. This is the new way, okay? So, make sure you know which wrist you're gonna put on top. Okay, so put your hands down. Okay, quick, cross your arms. Now, Michelle?
It wasn't even crossed.
Okay, so a little bit more difficult. You have to think about it. Can't do it quite as easily. All right, so now we're gonna put your hands down. Okay, here's the assignment again. Another question is gonna be flashed up here. Answer it at the same time, simultaneously, as closely together as you can. Cross your arms the new way. Ready? Go. 24. Okay. Now, how many people noticed a little bit of a delay in the crossing of the arms? Anybody not cross their arms the new way? Anybody? Anybody want to admit it?
We have to
Okay.
practice it in the past.
All right.
We remember.
So, arms in your last one. No, 24 was the answer. Okay, so one last one. Again, cross your arms the new way and answer this. Go.
300.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So who noticed a big delay? I mean, it was pretty evident.
Yeah.
Not very. Okay. So very, very good. It was 300. So that's all we're going to do for now, because we'll come back to it. So just you guys did exactly what you were supposed to, and we'll come back to that. So the first topic is, the first talking point is, why is leadership important? So the way I like to talk about it is, good leaders and effective leadership development are imperative for organizational success. So organizations that don't pay attention to this are not going to do very well. I had that last problem come up to 300 for a reason, because it's a significant number. In the United States, $300 billion is lost to productivity every year. So that's $300 billion that the gross domestic product could have in its coffers if people were productive. So the question comes up, what is causing that lack of productivity? And the answer is disengaged employees. 4 out of 5 employees worldwide are not delivering their full potential to help their organization succeed. That's 4 out of 5. In America, it's 3 out of 5. And what that means is, an engaged employee is someone who understands what to do to help the company succeed. They feel emotionally connected to the organization and the leaders, and they're willing to put forth the effort. And sometimes it's referred to as discretionary effort. You know, you have some people who will put in the letter of the law, but then there's a lot of discretionary effort that they can put in. So an engaged employee is someone who is engaged to the point that they're putting in that discretionary effort. Does anybody recognize where this scene, what movie this scene is from, by any chance? Do you? Office Space? Yeah, Office Space, which is a movie that epitomizes disengaged employees. So, that's what's going on in the business world. And why are these workers disengaged? Because of crappy bosses. If we look at this, Dilbert, there's a reason that 2,000 newspapers in 65 countries and 25 languages have the Dilbert cartoon. There's a reason why Scott Adams is worth $75 million, because this this resonates with people in the working force. Gallup did a workshop with some leaders from regional banks. And one of the exercises was to have them write up a quick little brief on why is their company the best to work for, as if they're going to deliver it to graduating stars from college, to try and entice them to come work for them. So these guys worked on these, and as you can imagine, they had these very glowing briefs that sounded just like the brochures about how innovative their work was and the stuff that they were doing. And so then the Gallup people posed a question to them and said, okay, here's a hypothetical question from one of those star graduates. will I be guaranteed to get a good boss? And the guys are like, no. So here's all these great, wonderful things that they can say to try and get someone to work for them, but they can't guarantee that you, in this case the graduates, would get a good boss. This book here in 2007 was the Best Business Book Award. The reason is because it resonates with people. If you are at a networking event and you ask a group of people, how many of you can tell me stories about embezzlement at your company? Chances are no one's going to have any kind of stories. But if you say, how many people here have poor leaders in their company? A lot of stories about poor managers, poor leaders. Those are frequent. So, here's something that companies highly guard against, embezzlement and regulations for how to handle that stuff. Yet how much money are they losing out on because leaders and managers are not doing the best that they can do, not providing an empowering workplace. So Gallup says the impact that the supervisor has in today's workplace can be either very valuable or very costly to the organization. That's because people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. Matter of fact, in the Harvard Business Review, I thought this was pretty funny. So they have the value of happiness, how employee well-being drives profits. And there's a couple of different stories in here. One of them is by DoubleClick. You guys familiar with DoubleClick? Google bought them. They're the advertising, the banner ads, really big company. And the CEO was talking about how important it is, as he feels as a CEO, to pay attention to how the people are doing in the company. And he said that when they do exit interviews for people who leave, the majority of people leave because of the boss, of the people that they work for. So we can see it's a really big problem. So the question is, why does this happen? So we're going to look at this skill progression chart. And if you look at the blue side, this is the continuum of skills that are related to a technical expertise. So basically the techniques of doing their job, not IT technical, but the techniques. And then the green one shows the people. So this is just a very simplified diagram. But if you look at it, when you have individual contributors, most of the emphasis on them is on the technical aspects of their job. You hope that they have some skills, people skills related to working well with others and getting along and being polite and all that stuff. However, as you promote people up into the supervisory position and above, more and more of their skills should be in the realm of helping, working with people and helping people be more productive, and less about the technical side. But what typically happens? Who typically gets promoted in an organization?
Good individual contributors.
Good individual contributors. That person who's a whiz with the accounting information. That person who is the best on the line doing whatever widget they're doing. Those are people that get promoted because that's easy to judge how well they're doing. Daniel Goleman, who is popular for the emotional quotient, he talks about how leadership skills are mostly learned by people, and it's a subconscious process. It's not something that people typically do intentionally or with reflection. It's stuff that we learn from watching the people growing up. Your coaches, your parents, teachers, clergy, if you're have a rich religious life. Those are the people that you see when they act under adversity that you kind of take in intrinsically, not really noticing that you're getting those lessons. And that's how most of the leadership is brought into the organization. So a person down here gets promoted because they're really good at computer programming, and then they're left to their own devices when it comes to leadership. So we're all familiar with the coach who throws the chair across the court, or watching our parents argue and taking in those lessons of that's how to handle conflict. So this is where the neuroscience comes in. There's things that we can learn about how our brains work that we can then apply to being more effective in our lives. So I say it this way. Neuroscience and cognitive behavioral psychology can teach us about how human beings are wired. So if you think about it, we're all wired a particular way. So just like knowing the more how a computer works, the more effective you're going to be with it. The more you know how your brain is wired, the more effective you're going to be. So we're going to take a look at the brain, really, really close. And inside are neurons. We have 85 billion neurons, and each of those have thousands of connections to other neurons, which means there's about 100 trillion connections. So that's pretty significant computing power, looking at it from the perspective of say, even a computer. As far as scientists are concerned, this is the most complex processing entity in the universe. We haven't found anything that can do as much processing as the human brain. So this kind of brings up the question, why do we need all that complexity? Why do we need all that computing power? The reason is related to the sensory parts of our body. We bring in about 11 million pieces of information a second. And I used to say bits as in pieces, but it sounds too much like computer bits, so I say pieces now. But 11 billion or million pieces of information a second. Now most of that's through the visual aspect. That takes up a lot of the processing. But can you imagine trying to track 11 million things at a time? Breathing and which individual muscles have to move just to do this, and blinking and digestion and cell division and all that stuff. So the brain has been designed to work this out, and it works in a certain way that is able to handle this and allow us to do other things like create cars and invent new gadgets and little 3D things on telephones and stuff like that. So if you think about it, our brain is like an iceberg. How many people have heard we use about 10% of our brains? So it's starting to be less and less of a given rule. We actually use all of our brains, but only a small part of it are we conscious of. So it's a lot like the iceberg. You got the conscious part, which is the part above the water, and then the majority of it is the subconscious. So scientists doing research have discovered or have figured out that of the 11 million pieces of information that we process, the conscious can only handle about 40 pieces at a time. So if you think about this, it makes sense. A phone number is 10 different digits. So if you're trying to dial a phone at the same time you're trying to drive, you're pretty much reaching the capacity of you being able to handle all of that effectively and not miss something. So that means the rest of the computing is done by the subconscious. So if you think about it, that is going to have a huge influence on our daily lives. And in a lot of ways, we don't even know what kind of influence it has. And that's why you're here. You're going to learn about this. So we're going to take a simple act of talking to somebody and kind of look at what's going on neurologically to show what the subconscious might be doing in the background. So most people, when they talk between 130 to 150 words per minute. That's the average range. Some of us talk a little bit quicker. A professional auctioneer, still being understood, can talk about 250 words per minute. And that's pretty much the fastest, and still be understood. If someone's doing a presentation, about 110. We typically talk slower when we're talking to a group of people. Maybe not me so much, but it's usually slower. So if you take a look at how fast our brains process, it's from 1,000 words per minute to 3,000 words per minute. So that's a big difference. Some scientists even think that it's multiple times of that because of the non-verbal aspects of our brain. So like when we think of something, a lot of times it shows up as a little movie with thoughts and emotions that go along with it in an instance, and that's not even counting that's not even counted in this. So it could even be a lot more. But let's just go with the 3,000. So if you look at that, so say our brains are computing at 3,000 words per minute, and we're talking to any one of these things, well, the scientists actually have a name for that, and they call it the speech-thought differential. So there's a difference between how fast we think and how fast people talk. So when you do the math, that's a pretty big leftover thinking space. Now, I don't think anybody of us really think that our neurons take a break when we're not doing something. There's always something going on. And that's one of the things that they found out about the neurons, is that they have to be active. It's just something they have to do. So there's always something going on with our neurons. So with that leftover thinking space, when you're talking to someone or you're watching something, there's something going on. And one way to kind of look at what's going on is the commentator. So I'm going to introduce you to the commentator. The commentator is that little voice in your head that kind of talks to you. It's like, oh, should I have that cake? Oh, I probably shouldn't have it, but I could work out an extra little bit at the gym. So this is part of what's going on with that extra thinking space. So to really give you an idea, to really introduce you to the commentator, I'm going to stop talking for 30 seconds and just let you relate to your commentator. So 30 seconds is kind of a long time, isn't it? So how many people heard their commentator? Yeah. So sometimes the commentator says things like, hope this is going to be worth it because I got so much to do. Or, darn, I forgot to let the dog out. I'm going to have a mess to clean up. Could be a message like, hey, should have had a second cup of coffee. Maybe even, 30 seconds. Is he really going to stand there and not say anything for 30 seconds? This guy's crazy. Then again, he did, grow up in Eagle River, Alaska. So now, as much as I know that this goes on and know about this, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So sometimes when I do this, people frown, don't raise their hands that they heard it. And so I said, well, did your commentator say something like this? Oh, I didn't turn it up. Anyway, commentator, this is just great. I don't have a commentator. And usually when I do that, they start laughing because that's exactly what they were saying in their head. I don't have a darn commentator. What the heck's he talking about? So now back to where I was. Even me, having known this is going on, it's not like I can turn it off. So when I do this and I stand there for 30 seconds, I have a conversation going in my head. And again, I didn't turn my computer up, so can't really hear it. But and what's funny is because I've done this presentation enough now, this actually does go through my head now every time because I know the slide's coming up. But there's still those things that are going on in my head. And that's because we have that extra processing power that we don't necessarily know that's going on. All right, so we'll skip that. So when you're in a conversation with somebody, or you're watching a presentation, or you're watching a show that maybe isn't just a mindless, sitcom show, your brain, that commentator, is doing stuff. It's doing stuff like think about gut feelings, rationalizing, calculating, it's interpreting, it's making up stories about what's going on, it's arguing, it's deciding whether you should believe that or not. All this stuff is going on in your head. So this is something that we need to realize that we do, and the more you can pay attention to that voice and what it's saying, the more you're going to have access from a conscious perspective of what's going on in your subconscious. And you're also going to start realizing how much of our day is actually conditioned behaviors that we're not necessarily aware of. So if we look at this again, the subconscious is basically mental processes inaccessible to our conscious but influence our judgments, our feelings, and our behavior. And that's also known as conditioning. I've been kind of using it interchangeably. So here's another conditioned exercise. So I want you to kind of visualize in your head that you've had a great night's sleep. You slept so good that you actually woke up before your alarm went off. That's how rested you were. And you go down and you have breakfast with your family. You actually get to cook breakfast, sit around the table, enjoy a couple stories, maybe even have time to read the paper instead of grab it and take it with you to work. And you say, you know what, I'm still a little bit early, but I'm gonna have a nice, comfortable, leisurely drive into work. So you get in your car, it's a nice sunny day, you got the windows down, the, what are these again? Cherry blossoms are out, you can smell, you can hear the birds, you got maybe some Beach Boys on the radio. You're going 40, 50 miles an hour to work because you got plenty of time, and you know what, today's a good day, I'm not gonna get myself stressed out. So you're driving around this little bend, and you come into town and you see this. What do? What did you do? What did you do in your head when you think of that? You lift your foot off the, even though you know you're going 5 miles below the speed limit, we are conditioned to pull our foot off of the brake because we see this. How many people sometimes drive home from work and don't even remember the drive? It's because of that conditioned behavior. One of the reasons why teenagers, and Ash, you listening? My kids are here tonight. So one of the reasons that teenagers have a high accident rating is because they're so new to learning to drive and there's so many things that they have to do. Again, the conscious brain can only handle 40 pieces of information a second. So what we've been doing for years that's now in the subconscious, even with a stick shift, you know, where we can downshift and come around a corner and still talk and, you know, read the sign on the left of the road, is because we've conditioned those behaviors and the teenagers have not yet. That's why rules have been passed, regulations have been passed that until a certain point they can't drive with friends, to a certain point they have to not drive at night because there's more concentration going on. But that's why, it's because that's what our brains do. So from a brain perspective, we're going to look through what the process is about how we process information and how this relates to the stuff we're talking about. So if we look at the brain, there's certain parts of it. So there's the limbic system, and I'm sorry the red's a little bit hard to read there. But the limbic system is the part that's in charge of the emotions, behavior, memory storage. So from an evolutionary scale, it's the middle part to have been developed. The part down here is the reptilian brain, and that handles all the autonomic responses. And this is a very simplified version of this, so I wouldn't necessarily go on Jeopardy thinking you know neuroscience for 400, Alex. But so this is the limbic system. Now part of the limbic system is the amygdala. This is the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and procreate. That's what the amygdala handles. So this is an important thing, and we'll see more about that in a second. The next part of the brain, which is the newest part, which is why it's called the neocortex, is the prefrontal cortex, and basically all of this is the cortex. This is the thinking part of the brain. So this handles the executive functions. This is where our consciousness and personality reside. So this is the part that handles 40 pieces of information in a second. Now this guy here, Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize. He's a psychologist, but he won it in economic sciences because he did work on decision making. And he's the one that figured out that it's more effective to show the one kid on television who's starving than saying thousands and thousands of kids around the world are starving, because our systems relate more to that single kid than it does to big numbers that we can't compute in our head. So the reason I bring him up is because he refers to the brain with regard to 2 systems. So it's easier to say system 1 and system 2 rather than saying limbic system and amygdala and all that stuff. So the system 1 is the fast reacting system. So that's the quick, reflexive, emotional part. System 2 is the slow thinking system. So this brings me back to crossing arms. So when I had you crossing arms without thinking about it, you're able to do it even when I was giving you math equations. That's because it's handled in the system 1. It's a conditioned behavior that you don't even have to think about how you're moving your arms. As soon as I introduced you doing it the new way with the other arm on top, that brings in system, I'm pointing at it, but that brings in system 2. So system 2 means you have to stop and really think about what you're doing. So like when you first rode a bike, you had to kind of stop and think and figure out, oh, I'm starting to tip, until it became a learned response. And then system 1 takes over. So that's why I bring him in. So now we're going to look at, so here's the thing with system 1 and system 2. So as long as something's in system 1, then you can react to things pretty effectively. But as soon as you say, okay, I'm going to change my behavior and start doing something different, well, system 2 will allow you to do that as long as nothing else is taking away some of that 40 pieces of information processing power. So as soon as I had you do the fraction equation, it said, forget worrying about which wrist is on top, and you either stumbled in putting your hands together, or some people actually go back to doing it the regular way. And that's one of the reasons why behavior change is so hard, because you're fine when you're able to just concentrate on one thing, but as soon as other things like life intrude, then that goes out the window. So we're going to take a look at it in a little bit more detail. So this is the brain. This is information packets. Most of our sensory information comes in directly to the brain through the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. So that goes directly to the brain. Anything that's sensory related or internal comes up through the spinal cord into the brain. So when it comes in, it all goes to the thalamus. So the thalamus is like the mixing board at a club where it parcels out all the information. This information goes to the lights, this information goes to the microphones, this one goes to the drums, blah, 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 blah. It says, here's all this electrons, here's how I'm going to parse it out. So the thalamus gets this information that the body's receiving, and it decides, okay, some of the information needs to go to the neocortex. So that's the thinking brain. So I have to decide something about this. Some of it goes, especially the to the occipital lobe, so all of that visual information gets processed back here. And then once it does that, it goes to the amygdala to say, all right, now that I've perceived this, now that I've taken this information in, how do I feel about it? So if you're on the beach in Hawaii and you see a beautiful sunset, your eyes take in the colors of the sunset, your body takes in the temperature and the light breeze and the sand under your feet, and your ears are taking in the sound of the surf, and then it goes to the amygdala, and you say, you know what, this is a beautiful sunset, I feel really good. There's also information that goes through the hippocampus at the same time. So the hippocampus is the part of the brain that handles the memory storage, but it also sets the context of how we're going to relate to this information. So if you're on that beach and you're on your honeymoon and you don't have to be anywhere and you got the little fruity drink with the umbrella in it, then the hippocampus says, wow, what a beautiful night. I'm going to remember this forever. However, if you're there with the kids and you're late for the luau and you want to get a good seat, you're like, yeah, this is nice, but I got to go. So that hippocampus is what's setting the context and giving you, filtering how you look at that information. So we can start to see how this plays a role in whether you're talking to that celebrity you really wanted to meet or your mother-in-law. The hippocampus is going to be setting up different contexts for that conversation. So this is one of the things that we're going to start learning about. So when it's all working together, this is what it looks like. So, and it's just approximate timing, but basically it goes and comes back to the amygdala. So that's when system 2 is involved. That's when everything's fine, conditions are normal, don't have to worry about anything. But system 1 is also a part of our mental processing. So system 1 happens when, say, you see a snake. In this case, a black mambo in DC. So you see a snake. Now, system 2 is going to work the same. It's going to come in, say, that's the shape of a snake, I should be scared of snakes. The context is probably not pretty good, that this is going to be a good thing, but it's going to process it in that way. However, system 1 works a little bit differently. Information comes into the thalamus says danger, sends it straight to the amygdala. The amygdala's job is to put the body into high alert. So one of my jobs in the Navy was as damage control assistant. So basically, what that means is when we go to general quarters, I'm the one that goes and is the emergency amygdala, basically, saying, oh my God, we have a fire, send people there, do this. So the amygdala is kind of like that damage control assistant in that it says, something's dangerous to us, So let's shoot cortisol into the bloodstream to power the muscles. Let's constrict or get our breathing a little bit faster to get that oxygen in there. Let's have our vision kind of dilate so that we can focus on what the danger might be. And that's where it's going to decide, is it better to flight, fight, or freeze? You know, it's going to pick from those things, and that's what it's gearing the body to do. So that's its job. So if you look at it, with everything together, you see a snake, information comes in, you see how quickly that amygdala hits, because you don't have time to think. You have to react, and then that thought process will come up. So when, you know, back when this was more important, when you walked out of the cave and you saw out of the corner of your eye that oddly shaped, snake-shaped thing, your amygdala says, run, get the heck out of here, and you take off, and you're, you know, 20, 30 yards down the trail, when the brain says, oh, you know what, I think that really was just a stick. We can stop now and assess. But at least we're out of the danger, even if, you know, it wasn't there. So that's how it's supposed to work. So how many people have heard the phrase, count to 10 if you're angry before you say something? So this is, again, before we realized this stuff was going on, but really what that does is allow you a time for your prefrontal cortex to kick in so that you're making a more informed action or reaction to something rather than a automatic reaction. So that amygdala is going to kick in whether it's a snake or whether it's a crappy boss yelling at you or a bad work environment. And the problem with this is that under stress, with those all those chemicals in your body and that kind of wear and tear, that's why people are, you know, their jobs, their organizations, especially if they're not engaged employees, if they're disengaged employees, they're actually less healthy, they're actually have more sick days. So that's part of the productivity issue, is that it takes a toll on your body to have those kinds of stresses. Now, once upon a time, this was fine. And for the most part, conditioned behavior is not a bad thing. It's only when it's not working for you. But in the case of the amygdala, you know, this was designed to keep you from being stepped on by a mastodon, or being a saber-toothed tiger's lunch, or getting a beat down by Thorg and his friends. And even, you know, me growing up in Alaska, I did not have to worry about this very much. Well, at all. Maybe a moose in my yard, but, you know, never saw a grizzly bear. So the amygdala was kind of without a job to do in today's world. So today, it substitutes other things as dangers to us. Talking in front of people. I mean, we've all heard the statistics that it's one of the top 3 fears that people have, maybe even higher than death sometimes. So that's a fear. The amygdala says, oh, I have to talk in front of somebody? And obviously, you know, my amygdala is not really involved here because I'm fine. But some people, that's a real stressful event. Their wife or girlfriend is mad at them. That's an amygdala danger, going to fight or flight. Maybe someone's disappointed or frustrated with you. That's another thing that's going to trigger the amygdala. Thorg and his friends making fun of you. That's going to trigger the amygdala. You know, people do not like to look bad in front of other people. We have issues with looking good. So those are the things that are going to trigger our amygdala, and that's going to be the conditioned behavior that we've had that's going to come into play. So the boss yelling at you, triggered amygdala. Now, when your amygdala is triggered because it's taking away resources from your prefrontal cortex, your IQ actually decreases about 30 points on average. So what they've discovered is people who are under a stressful situation at work, so disengaged employees, they're less creative, less able to be creative, even if they are normally. Their vision is actually decreased, so they're not as observant as they normally would be, and they're not able to focus because, you know, you're worrying. Am I still on my job? Is he going to yell at me again? Is he going to make me stupid in front of other people? Do I look stupid in front of other people? All that's going on is going to detract. So one of the things that's significant that the Gallup saw is that the levels of engagement appear to change, but it has nothing to do with the economy, has nothing to do with how business is. It has to do with managers And the ability of managers is not improving. So this is a little bit of why I do what I do. So this is the third talking point. How do we take advantage of this? So my approach is that knowing this stuff, you can learn how to get improved results. So we're actually going to talk about cash. Not this kind of cash though, this kind of cash. But if you pay attention to this kind of cash, you'll get more of this kind of cash. So we go back to the progression chart here. So the way it's supposed to work is that as you get promoted, you learn more leadership behaviors, how to work with people, how to be effective with people, relationships, etc. Now, a lot of organizations don't recognize that this goes on and leave leadership up to whatever you have to bring with you. Some companies actually get this though, and so they establish leadership development programs, but they're usually missing something, and that's where the cash box comes in. So on this cash box, most companies know about the left side. The left side is the knowing side. So the K and the S stand for knowledge and skills. So this is knowing how to do something, knowing when and where to do it. This is what the resume is all about. Here's what I know how to do, here's what I've done before, here's the skills I have, here's the knowledge I've gotten, here's where I went to school. This is what we hire people on. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to put it how to do it. So, when organizations are hiring, this is the main thing they look at. Most of the training dollars is spent on the knowledge and skills portion of the box. But one of the things that they get as far as feedback goes is how much of that corporate training is productive. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but I've been through training where it's like, this isn't going to apply to me. Or either it's an interruption to some of the work I really need to get done, and I'm just going to have to do more work because I'm missing out on it today, just so someone can check a box that I went to this training, or else it's actually a boondoggle and I get to just jack around, as some people say, and goof off because I don't have any responsibilities. But a lot of times it's not, business doesn't change when they go back to work because it's not really making any kind of difference. So in this way, it's seen as the cost of doing business. So you might have a good weekend seminar and high five, but then on Monday it's business back as usual. And even if you want to try and do something different, there's a lot of inertia there at work that makes you go back to doing the same old thing. Part of the problem is that people think knowledge is power, but it isn't power. Applying that knowledge is power. So that's where the other side of the cash box comes in. On the right side, I call this the performing side. So this is attitudes and habits. So attitudes you can think of wanting to do something, having the will to do it, and habits is consistently doing it. So we were talking about earlier what an engaged employee is. An engaged employee is a person who knows what to do and actually is engaged and wants to do it for the company, and it's that discretionary effort. They're giving discretionary effort because their attitudes and habits are aligned with what the organization is doing. So we hire based on knowledge and skills, but why are most people counseled or fired? It's not usually with the skills or the knowledge, because that's easy to fix. It's not because Joe doesn't know Joe in accounting knows how to add 2 and 2. It's because he refuses to do it on time or argues with you about doing it. So very little training dollars is spent on this because this is still something that's new to organizations. Most of the leadership development models and processes are all based on the Industrial Revolution. Because back then, when the industrial started kicking up, the job was, let's get these people on the line, making things, not complaining about work, being quiet, doing what they're told, on time. There's no, family life at work. You leave it at the door. So that's a different kind of need with people as cogs and easily replaceable parts than what we're seeing today. Today, more and more people want to have work that means something. They want to make a contribution. They want to make a difference. So there's new leadership models needed, new leadership approach. And that has to do with paying attention to the attitudes and habits side of the cash box. When you do this, you have people who are aligning themselves with the corporate goals because they see what's in it for them to help them with their own goals. And you can actually do a return on investment analysis of this because you're actually seeing that there's some behavior change, that there's some results that are coming out of it. So in this way, it's considered an investment rather than a cost of doing business. So that's kind of the aha moment. All right, so now I'm going to take you to school. So we're going to go to the chalkboard. So this is the Bravo Zulu formula for improving results. So first we start with improved results. That's the goal. We want to get better performance, more productivity, more effective working relationships. Now the nice thing about this, again, I call it leadership and it's business related, but this equation works whether it's for personal reasons or business reasons because all work is relationships between people. And what are we doing with the information that we have to do with our organizations? So whether you're applying this to your business or to your life, it doesn't matter. It works for both. So the key here is improve results. If we listen to, shoot, all of a sudden his name's Tony Robbins. Yeah, thanks. If you do what you've always done, then you'll get what you've always got. And then there's always the Einstein one, insanity, doing the same thing over and expecting different results. So improve results in our case means different results. You got to do something different if you want to get something different. So that means we have to have positive behavior change. There's plenty of examples of negative behavior change. That's easy to do because that's just letting your amygdala, kind of run things. The idea is how do we get positive behavior change? So once we get people to change their behavior in a positive way, then we're going to get improved results. So there's some things that we need to put on the other side of the equation. So the first thing is knowledge and skills. So like you here today, you're learning some new knowledge and skills about how our brains work. So that's going to be new. My hope is that tomorrow, when you're going around your work day, you're seeing things a little bit differently. You're noticing, oh my gosh, that guy's amygdala's hijacked. Or, hey, that little voice in my head, I can hear it saying things, So my hope is that you're actually going to be seeing the world a little bit differently tomorrow. That's improving the knowledge and skills. You also have to have goals. You have to have something that you're working towards in order to get those improved results. And it's not just any kind of goals. For the way I approach it, there's a specific type of goal, and it's called SMART. It's a nice little acronym. But the goal has to be specific. You have to outline in detail what it is that you want to have. There's also a role that the subconscious plays in this. So for example, you can't just say, yeah, I want to be rich in a couple of years, because the subconscious can't do anything with that. However, if you say, by 2015, I want to have $10 million in the bank, well, that's something that the subconscious can latch onto. And it can start working on making that come about. And that's where the conditioned behaviors become more consistent with doing those actions that's going to get you to this goal. I want to be a director in my company in 5 years. That's a specific part of the goal. And that's required for it to be effective. It also has to be measurable. You have to be able to know where you are on the scoreboard. So again, I want to be rich. Well, some people feel rich having 20 bucks in their pocket. Again, nothing to really tie into. It's got to be attainable. If you're 25, you can't say I want to be president in 5 years because you have to be 35. So you want to make sure that, okay, is my goal going to be one that's actually doable? There's such thing as stretch goals, but you don't want to do something that's not going to be reachable. The next one is relevant. So this is where you have to kind of tie it in to where your subconscious really gets on board. Basically, you're engaging your subconscious into this by making it relevant to you. So I've given this a version of this talk at my local gym as part of their 90-day challenge program. So it's a 90-day where you're on teams and you have these workouts that you do and you get points. And then at the end, whoever got the most points, whatever team gets their name on a trophy. But it's a really nice program. But when I talk to them, I say, you know, it's got to be relevant. Why are you here? And so one guy says, you know what? I'm, 50 years old. I'm 300-something pounds plus. I've got, heart issues. I want to see my kids graduate from high school or from college. That's a relevant, that's a really relevant goal. So he's got, specific, it's measurable, and it's relevant. So this is going to help us do what it takes for that system 2 not to get too distracted by life happening. The system 2 is going to keep coming back and say, you know what, it's really important for me to keep crossing my arms the other way because it's relevant. And then the last one's got to be time-based. You have to put a time on it so that you know what you're working towards. So we have the K, S, and G up there, but there's still something missing. So looking at the cash box, what are we missing? Attitude. Right. So that's what's missing from the equation. Now the importance of attitudes is that it's really a significant part of the equation. It goes up, and you don't have to, I'll explain the math part of it here, but in the exponent section, that means that attitudes impacts everything within the parentheses. So if you have the attitude and the wants and the will to use your knowledge and skills and achieve those goals, you're going to leverage it, and that's where the attitude part comes in. So that's where the businesses sometimes lose out, is they don't realize. They say, oh, we just give them bonuses for doing good work. Well, it's been proven in study after study that money is not a good incentive for prolonged, good, productive improvements. Again, Harvard Business Review, how employee well-being drives profits. Studies show that if you've got employees that feel like they're valued and taken care of, and even if they're making a little bit less, excuse me, I'm kind of spin a little bit. Even if they're making a little bit less than industry average, they're going to be more productive because they feel valued and taken care of and respected. So that's the attitude part. So we have the formula, and can you guys see how that can kind of make a difference? Right. So this is good. However, there's another aspect of our brains that come into play here. And the way I'm going to address it is by giving you a riddle. So there's 6 frogs on lily pads, and one of them decides to jump off. How many frogs are left on the lily pads?
None.
Anybody else have an answer? None? The answer is there's 6 frogs because deciding is not doing. But one of the things that our brain does is because the only access we have to ourselves is through our conscious part of our brain, we act like that is who we are. We act like if we've decided something, if we've planned something, if we've imagined it being that way, it's a foregone conclusion it's going to happen. And how many times have you decided to do something and 2 weeks later it's like, oh man, you know what? I meant to be doing this. Because that's how we relate to it. That's that disconnect between the subconscious and the conscious. So deciding is not doing and knowing is not doing. So there's a little bit more involved in that improved results. So in this case, positive behavior change really means lasting behavior change. It's good, a lot of times we'll make a decision and for a couple of days, we'll be good with that, but then next thing we know, geez, it's been a week since I've done what I've said I wanted to be doing. So we have to figure out how to do lasting behavior change. The other part of this too is this is also ties into why it's hard to learn leadership behaviors. So I was talking about how most of us learn leadership through our conditioning as we're growing up. It's all learned intrinsically. It's just kind of noticed, and you kind of take it in and you don't really reflect on it. So there's aspects of leadership from the knowledge and skill side that we can learn very quickly. The neocortex can learn things in an instant. However, it's the limbic system that's the memory, the long-term memory storage and the conditioned behaviors that we actually have to make that change in information. So that's why it's hard to learn the leadership, because it's not a skills and knowledge thing. It's actually incorporating the emotional and some subconscious conditioning stuff. Because when you're faced with an adversity from a leadership perspective, you don't always have time to think. You want to have good behaviors there ready to go. So what comes into play is learning retention. If you're exposed to an idea one time, after 30 days you can expect to maybe retain 10% of it. However, if you're exposed to an idea 6 times, after 30 days you're going to retain a heck of a lot more than that. So here's an example. Most of us in here are old enough for this question. Finish this jingle. 2 all beef patties.
Special sauce.
Sesame seed.
Okay, so but for most of you guys had that. That hasn't been played in over 20 years. But we still remember that because the advertising people know this thing goes on. You know, how many, there's so many jingles that we know. There's sayings that we know. You know, don't speak unless. Yeah, there's all these messages that we've received that we know even today because of this. So this goes on. So that's why in my developmental processes we include this. We do spaced repetition courses. So my developmental, I don't call it a class, it's actually a developmental process that happens over the space of 12 weeks. So you meet for an hour and a half each week over 12 weeks. In between meetings, there's actually homework. You're actually listening and reading the text of the information that we're learning each day, so that by the end of the week, you're almost reciting along with it as it's playing on the radio or on your MP3 player. Because what we're doing is creating those neuron pathways that are going to have us learning this at an intrinsic level. So there's another element. Remember I told you the hippocampus sets the context. It pays attention to novelty. It pays attention to what goes into memory. So the novelty part, most of the stuff, the information that comes in, it's not necessarily processing it all at the same time. It's kind of like the TV scans, that it'll scan to put the image on the screen, but all it's going to show is what changes, because that's something that's new, and that's the way our brain works. I can never remember, I think it was Seth Godin who talked about the purple cow. He says, when you're driving down the road, the cows all look the same, they're black and white, but if there were a purple one in that field, your head would snap around and notice it, because that's the hippocampus. It says, oh, wait a second, purple cow. So, you have to incorporate that into leadership development in order to take advantage of getting it into a contextual level. So, for us, we make that experiential. So, doing the arm crossing exercise, that was an experiential exercise. You guys now have the concept of System 1 and System 2. You now have the concept of interrupting, what happens when you interrupt that and you can't change, cross your arms right. And you're going to remember that probably after 30 days. Where if I was just to tell you, hey, there's a System 1 and System 2, and some guy won a Nobel Peace Prize for it, 30 days you may not, remember that. So experiential, that involves starting practices. So putting into place practices that are going to help you keep doing the behaviors you want and creating those habits. So the last thing has to do with another, I don't know if phenomenon is the right word, but another aspect of our brains. Our brains are wired for social interaction. That's, back when the brains were formed, it was important to be a valued member of your social tribe because it took all of you to survive. So if you notice someone being angry with you, your brain was wired to take notice of that because that might be something you have to correct. In indigenous populations, one of the worst punishments was to be banished from the tribe. And the reason is because of the way our brains are wired. So another aspect of that is mirror neurons. When you're talking to somebody, your brain will actually start firing, the neurons will start firing in a way similar to the person that you have a connection with. And the way they found this was they were doing research on, I think it was chimpanzees, I can't remember the specific primate, but it was like chimpanzees, for all you know, it was chimpanzees. So, and they were doing things on, which neurons went to different physical things. And they had one chimpanzee still hooked up when an intern came in on a hot day licking an ice cream cone. And what they noticed by accident was that when he went and licked his ice cream cone, the same neurons fired for the chimpanzee, even though he didn't move, the same neurons fired licking that ice cream cone. So that's when they started realizing we have these mirror neurons. So if you've ever, Tom, are you married?
Yes,
How long?
40 years.
Okay. So there are times where your wife knows just what you're thinking?
I hope not.
Not all the time. But I mean, is there
Yes.
ever a time where
Yes.
she's saying something and you're like, I was just going to say that?
Yep.
You might notice that with best friends, with close friends, where they're out of the blue, they'll start talking about something. You're like, I was just going to say that. And it's because there's that, they're not quite sure how the neurons get the messages. This is where a little bit of the quantum physics comes in. There's relationships between things that we don't understand yet. But one of the things that they found out is that we have these neurons. So the more you are in tune with someone, the more you're connected with someone, then the more you're going to be empathetic, the more you're going to be able to gather nuances about what they're thinking. And they might say, when you say, how are you doing? And they smile and say, hey, everything's great. You might know, you know what, something's not right. And it's because you probably have some neurons firing that are in tune with that person. But this is also why when someone gets an amygdala hijack and gets upset, why our amygdalas get hijacked. Because the response is, uh-oh, there's something here that's the danger, I need to watch out for myself too. And that's why arguments, a simple, tone in a voice, in a simple sentence, can escalate into a big fight because of mirror neurons. The last aspect of the mirror neurons come into play with storytelling. One of the things that we are really attuned to, that we learn a lot from, is when we tell stories. When someone's telling a story, our brains are firing, just like that monkey's was firing, as if we were actually doing that. Visualization, if anybody's been an athlete before, visualization is a mechanism that's used in a lot of successful athletes because it's a way to actually get just about 95% of the neurons firing to do that same action when you're physically doing it. So there's a case, there was this guy, he played golf, and I don't remember his handicap, but it was respectable, but he was in a situation that he couldn't play golf for about 8 years.